In the Mafia world, a hitman doesn't confess. Confession isn't redemption, it's exposure. It means you've become a liability, and liabilities don't live long. Yet one man did exactly that. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He walked straight into the presence of Lucky Luciano and told him everything. Not part of it. Not a version softened by excuses. Everything. Who hired him? Why the job was ordered. Who else knew? What was supposed to happen next? Each sentence pushed him closer to a line no hitman ever crosses voluntarily. Because in this world, the truth isn't dangerous because it's illegal. It's dangerous because it rearranges power. And once power is rearranged, someone always pays. Luciano listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't threaten. He didn't signal approval or anger. That silence was worse than shouting. Because a man like Luciano doesn't need information to react. He needs information to decide. And the hitman understood exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a calculated surrender to the only person capable of controlling what the truth would destroy. Then, after saying everything that could possibly condemn him, the hitman asked for one thing. Not money, not protection, not even his life. Just one request, revealing that he understood something most people never do until it's too late. Surviving violence is easier than surviving what the truth unleashes once it's spoken aloud. And whether Luciano granted that request mattered less than the fact that the hitman knew exactly who had the right to hear it. A professional hitman survives by disappearing. New names, new cities, new faces. That was always an option. And that's what makes this moment so unsettling. Instead of running, the man chose to stay. And more than that, he chose to walk straight toward Lucky Luciano. This wasn't courage, it was calculation. The hitman understood something most people outside the Mafia never fully grasp. Running doesn't erase knowledge, it weaponizes it. The moment he completed the job, or failed it, he became a living archive of dangerous truths. Who ordered the hit? Who approved it? Who stayed silent? As long as he lived freely, he was a liability to everyone involved, including the men who once paid him. And liabilities don't get protection, they get erased. Running would only delay that outcome. Every mile put between him and New York would increase suspicion, not safety. The further he disappeared, the more valuable his death became. He would be hunted not for revenge, but for cleanup. Quietly. Efficiently. Eventually. The hitman also knew something else. Only one man had the authority to absorb the truth without triggering uncontrollable fallout. Not a boss who needed plausible deniability, not a middleman who would panic. Only Luciano could hear the full story and decide how much of it would matter, and how much would die with the man telling it. That's why the confession wasn't an emotional collapse. It was the last rational move left. By going directly to Luciano, the hitman was offering containment. He wasn't asking to be forgiven. He was asking to stop the truth from detonating randomly across the underworld. In a world built on silence, speaking becomes a form of leverage, but only if you speak to the right person. The hitman didn't run because running would turn him into an uncontrolled threat. He stayed because staying placed his fate inside a system Luciano alone controlled. And once he made that choice, there was no turning back. When the hitman started talking, he didn't pace himself. He didn't test the room. He unloaded everything at once, because partial truth would have been more dangerous than silence. Sitting in front of Lucky Luciano, he understood that hesitation would look like manipulation, and manipulation was unforgivable. He laid out the chain exactly as it was. Who initiated the idea? Who passed the message? Who stayed deliberately uninformed so they could deny everything later? Each name connected to another, forming a structure that wasn't meant to be seen all at once. This wasn't just a confession to a crime. It was a map of pressure points inside the Mafia itself. And that's what made it lethal. Every detail the hitman revealed carried consequences far beyond his own fate. One sentence could destabilize alliances. Another could implicate men who believed they were insulated by layers of distance. Truth, spoken at this level, doesn't expose individuals. It exposes systems. And once a system is exposed, it can't pretend nothing happened. What made the moment unbearable wasn't fear of Luciano's reaction. It was the realization that nothing could be taken back. The hitman knew that once the last name left his mouth, the room would never return to what it was before. Even if he walked out alive, the balance of power had already shifted simply because the information now existed. Luciano never interrupted. He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't correct or challenge a single point. That silence told the hitman something terrifying. The confession wasn't being judged morally. It was being assessed strategically. Luciano wasn't listening to decide whether the man deserved to live. He was listening to decide what the truth itself was worth. By the time the hitman finished speaking, the danger had fully changed shape. The risk was no longer that he had committed a murder. The risk was that he had made Luciano the only man who knew the entire story. And in that world, there is nothing more dangerous than being the one who knows too much, unless you're sitting across from the only person powerful enough to decide what knowledge is allowed to survive. Most men in Luciano's position would have stopped the confession early. Too dangerous, too much exposure, too many names that couldn't be unheard. But Lucky Luciano did the opposite. He let the hitman speak until there was nothing left to say. That wasn't mercy, it was discipline. Luciano understood a rule that defines real power. People reveal more when they aren't interrupted. Questions shape answers. Silence removes limits. By not reacting, not steering, not signaling approval or anger, Luciano created a vacuum, and the hitman filled it completely. Not just with facts, but with context, motives, fears, assumptions. The kind of information no interrogation ever extracts cleanly. This wasn't about verifying a crime. Luciano wasn't interested in guilt. He was interested in reach. How far the decision traveled. Who benefited from plausible deniability? Who thought they were invisible? Letting the hitman speak freely turned the confession into something far more valuable than evidence. It became a structural X-ray of the system itself. There was another reason Luciano stayed silent. Stopping the confession would have transferred control back to the hitman. It would have turned the truth into a bargaining chip. By allowing everything to be said, Luciano removed leverage completely. Once all the information was out, the hitman had nothing left to trade. No second act, no hidden threat, just exposure. And that exposure cut both ways. Luciano now carried knowledge that could destabilize multiple factions if released carelessly. That meant the problem was no longer the hitman. The problem was containment, how to absorb the truth without letting it ignite conflict elsewhere. This is why Luciano didn't rush the moment. He needed to understand not just what happened, but what would happen next if different parts of the truth were allowed to move. By letting the hitman finish, Luciano achieved something final. The man across from him stopped being a variable. He became a fixed cost, a known quantity. Whatever Luciano decided next wouldn't be reaction. It would be design. And in the Mafia world, the moment someone stops being unpredictable, their fate is no longer in their own hands. When the hitman finally stopped talking, the room didn't change. No verdict was announced. No threat followed. That silence was deliberate, and the hitman understood what it meant. Everything that could be said had been said. Whatever happened next would not be about truth anymore. It would be about consequence. That's when he asked for the one thing he still believed was possible. Not money, not protection, not a chance to disappear. Asking for any of that would have revealed weakness, or worse, misunderstanding. The hitman knew exactly who he was sitting in front of. Lucky Luciano didn't bargain with fear, and he didn't reward desperation. Survival was not something you requested. It was something you were granted or denied without explanation. So the hitman asked for something colder. He asked that what he had said would end with him. No public example, no chain reaction, no names dragged into daylight unnecessarily. He wasn't trying to save himself. He was trying to limit the blast radius. That request revealed how deeply he understood Luciano's world. He knew the real danger wasn't death. It was becoming the spark that set off something larger than anyone could control. By asking for containment instead of mercy, the hitman showed he grasped the hierarchy of consequences. He accepted that his own fate might already be sealed. What he couldn't accept was being used as a message that would force Luciano's hand elsewhere. He was asking Luciano to decide quietly, whatever the decision was, rather than let the truth ripple outward and ignite a war. This is what made the request so unsettling. It wasn't selfish. It was strategic. The hitman wasn't pleading for life. He was acknowledging Luciano's authority to define what the truth would do. And that placed Luciano in the most difficult position of all. Because granting that request wouldn't mean forgiveness. It would mean taking responsibility for the consequences of the truth himself. Denying it would mean letting the system burn off the excess through exposure and violence. The hitman had said everything. He had nothing left to offer. The only question now was whether Luciano would allow the truth to die quietly or decide that its impact needed to be felt. After the request was made, Lucky Luciano didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. The decision was never about the hitman alone. It was about what keeping or releasing the truth would do to the system. In that moment, Luciano wasn't weighing mercy against punishment. He was weighing stability against exposure. Luciano understood that every confession creates two problems. The first is the person who spoke. The second is the information that now exists. Killing a man is simple. Controlling what his words do after he's gone is not. If Luciano let the truth spread unchecked, it would tear through alliances, provoke defensive strikes, and reward the very chaos the hitman claimed to regret. If he buried it completely, he would signal that betrayal could be neutralized quietly, inviting others to try the same thing again. So Luciano chose neither extreme. What mattered was not whether the hitman lived or died, but whether the confession changed behavior across the board. Luciano's response was calibrated to do exactly that. The truth would be contained, but not erased. Known where it needed to be known. Silent where noise would cause damage. The hitman stopped being a person and became a variable already accounted for. This is why Luciano's power endured. He didn't treat honesty as virtue or betrayal as sin. He treated both as forces that had to be managed. The confession wasn't rewarded, and it wasn't theatrically punished. It was absorbed, neutralized, turned into leverage without becoming a spectacle. By the time the hitman's fate was settled, quietly, decisively, the larger lesson had already landed. Speaking the truth to Luciano didn't create safety. It created clarity. And clarity, in his world, didn't save you. It simply ensured that whatever happened next happened for a reason. That was the real outcome of the confession. Not forgiveness, not vengeance. Control. Because in the end, Luciano didn't decide the hitman's fate to make an example of him. He decided it to make sure no one else ever believed that truth, on its own, could change the balance of power. In the Mafia world, violence is expected. It's planned for. It's absorbed. But the moment someone speaks the full truth, everything becomes unstable. That's why the hitman didn't fear his crimes as much as he feared his confession. And that's why he chose to deliver it to Lucky Luciano, the only man capable of deciding what the truth would be allowed to do. Luciano didn't treat the confession as a plea or a threat. He treated it as raw material. Something that could either ignite chaos or be folded back into the system without tearing it apart. The hitman understood that surviving violence was one thing. Surviving what the truth unleashes once it's spoken was something else entirely. This story isn't about redemption or mercy. It's about authority, about who has the right to hear everything, and then decide how much of it matters. Luciano didn't reward honesty. He controlled its consequences. And in doing so, he reinforced the most important rule of all. Truth doesn't set you free. It puts you at the mercy of whoever controls the system you're confessing to. So when people ask why a hitman would confess everything to the very man who could destroy him, the answer isn't fear. It's understanding. Understanding that once the truth exists, Only power can contain it. And sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the room isn't a gun, it's the person who decides what happens after the truth is told.